Hello, welcome to the Art Channel with myself, Grace Adam, and my colleague Joshua White. We're at the Barbican Art Gallery in London looking at an exhibition called Boom for Real by Jean-Michel Basquiat.
I think this painting, Hollywood Africans, is actually one of the best pictures in the whole show. And it's so emblematic of Basquiat's interests and style and technique. And what it shows is Basquiat on the right here with two friends, Rammellzee and Toxic, visiting Los Angeles, the home of the movie industry, visit to the West Coast, and he's presenting them as outsiders. There's that ironic twist. And what we can see is Hollywood Africans at the top, but with reference to 1940, and then below Hollywood Africans is crossed out, that very characteristic way in which he adds and then negates or removes details in the pictures.
It is a really good example, isn't it? It's full of colour, it's full of verve, and it's quite frenetic. And it is, as you say, a comment on Hollywood. You have all this text, you also have the famous footprints, which appear in the pavement in Hollywood. And he does this very clever thing where he crosses out words which attracts your attention to them. So you look at the things that have been negated. And it is, I think, it is actually very thoughtful. These things can sometimes appear as if they've just been kind of rustled up, but I think he's really clever at plundering and gathering and collecting and curating text and image.
And it becomes a comment really on the history of discrimination against African Americans, particularly in the entertainment industry. We can see the outline there of Oscar, the statuette awarded to performers and other characters in Hollywood, and it was awarded to Hattie McDaniel for her performance in Gone with the Wind. We've got here the phrase self-portrait as a heel. There's a notion of him as a hustler, arriving to hustle in Hollywood for success. But all of the time there's that ironic awareness that he's facing these hurdles. You know, he's regarded as the outsider. He is the African American. But they're going to give it a go. They're going to chance it. And here on the top right, we've got references to sugar cane, which of course was a product largely harvested in the South by indentured labor.
I also think it taps into this idea of working across different areas, different media. He's there with two musicians. He was a DJ, he played music, he was part of that New York music scene, art scene, and earlier on the graffiti scene. And so it's that opportunity that he takes to just break out of one way of working. So I think it's quite an exciting time where these young guys are working across different areas, coming together and collaborating.
And this painting, in a sense, is very characteristic of the way in which he makes these pictures. They are challenging, they are compressed with detail, they are very dense, and they are difficult. When you first look at them, you're not sure where your eye is meant to be focusing. How do these juxtapositions produce sense and meaning? And it's, I think, the synthesis of these ideas and quotations and references that really sort of invest this charge into the picture.
Here we're looking at a collaboration between Basquiat and Andy Warhol, who became friends. Basquiat actually sought out Warhol, found him in a restaurant initially and sold him postcards. This is made in 1984 and it's called Arm & Hammer 2. Warhol comes in and hand paints these two logos, Arm & Hammer, this brand which appears across the States. Initially the brand was playing into the idea of Vulcan and the forge and strength. And Basquiat comes in and on the left obliterates this central image with one of his heroes, Charlie Parker, playing the saxophone. So you get this wonderful combination of ways of working. It's wonderful because it's pop art and punk and jazz all in one image.
They were introduced by Basquiat's Swiss dealer and Warhol's dealer, Bruno Bischofberger, and there was a suggestion made that they perhaps work together in some way. And this is a really successful but lesser known series of work. And it's reported that Warhol would make the first move, the first gesture, the senior artist, and then Basquiat would respond in turn. And you had this sort of wonderful sort of dialogue really between them, a conversation. And you can see that Basquiat has totally sort of transformed this idea of Warhol's rather deadpan kind of mirroring of the world. And I think it's so sort of clever how Basquiat takes that idea, the arm and hammer, the strength, the motion, and he transforms it, of course, into the art of music.
I think it is a very successful piece. I mean, they're two artists who admired each other and kind of wanted to be part of each other's art making for a period of time. So you get an older generation, a younger generation coming together, and you get these two quite disparate ways of working, actually, which do come together well. As you say, you get these sort of cliched images which Warhol reproduces and comments on, and Basquiat comes and puts this very frenetic mark making on the top of these pieces, and that actually hangs together. There is a union that happens in the work.
What the picture also illustrates is the way in which Basquiat is so sensitive to and so engaged with the wider culture of the United States, of his youth, the figures, often great African-American athletes or musicians, allowed to rise to the sort of full potential of their talent, like Charlie Parker, which he then sort of impresses upon the coinage. So we've got 1 cent here and liberty above. But really, Charlie Parker just sort of protrudes, doesn't he? His saxophone comes over the edge of the flat surface of the coin into almost real space.
It's nice because sort of jazz wins out, doesn't it? That informality kind of spills out of the painting.
We're looking, Grace, at Untitled, painted in 1982, and it's part of a series of pictures that depict boxers. And these boxers, to some extent, are self-portraits, but they're also archetypes of the hero, the great victorious athlete, and he identifies with them. He aspires to these boxers. They have an intrinsic power and confidence and conviction, and we can see a halo around this rather skeletal looking head that also at the same time rather resembles a gas mask. It's peculiar, isn't it?
It's a very odd image, and actually if you said to somebody, oh, it's a painting of a boxer, lots of cliches come into your head. This defies all of those. And it's interesting you talking about the fact that he relates and refers to heroes, because he talks actually in one interview about the artist being a kind of hero and having that kind of role, that kind of job. I think this really is a fascinating painting, and it's also part of this resurgence of expressionist painting in the 1980s. So if you think about people like Schnabel and Clemente, in fact he collaborated briefly with Clemente in the 80s. So there is this, as I said, resurgence, this re-engagement with the artist being in the work. So it feels quite immediate, and it's almost an antidote to kind of cool pop art in a way.
It's very expressive, it's very exuberant, this painting, and it really captures Basquiat's character and interests. There's a cockiness there. He's almost sort of playing with us. It's the fantasy of many young people to feel that they are triumphant, they can conquer the world. And I'm drawn also to the brushwork, this extraordinary sort of speed, of the sort of here the oil stick, but also the brushwork is very vivacious and lively, and it's rather entrancing to look at, actually.
Interesting too that he never went to art school, and he's completely self-trained, and he said the way he learned about art was to look at art, going to MoMA, going to museums and galleries as a child with his parents, with the school. So everything he consumed and learned, I think he was justifiably proud of the learning that he did as an adult. He had a huge library of music, a huge library of art books. So the references are they're intelligent and thoughtful references that go into the work. So here we're looking at Leonardo da Vinci's greatest hits from 1982. It's 4 panels of oil on canvas with collage, with drawing into it. It's a really fascinating and intense piece of work. And it really speaks of Basquiat's lasting obsession with anatomy. If you think about the boxers, the self-portraits, anatomy, bodies, those beautiful lines appear in everything. And at the top here, there's a wonderful page, a study of the back of a body with those beautiful calves and legs. And what I really like is the way that his signature, the crown, actually appears as part of those almost hieroglyphs. And he connects the panels with these wonderful kind of drawn ladders.
Well, he had his spleen removed as a young child after being hit by a car, and his mother gave him a copy of Gray's Anatomy. And he becomes obsessed with these drawings and representations of the body, like many kids do, actually. And he's quoting from Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical drawings, these extraordinary studies, really, of the ligaments and musculature and bones. And it shows us, doesn't it, again, Basquiat's awareness of art history, this quotation. But he takes it so much further than simply copying the original drawings. There's this sort of intense set of relationships within the picture that lead us all over, up and down these ladders, looking at the legs. We've got this projection here, this sort of arm that becomes a sort of, like a sort of spear. It's so sort of busy and rich in detail.
And I think it demonstrates that Basquiat doesn't make any differentiation between what's on TV, what's in a magazine, a commercial, what he hears, what he sees in a conventional art history book. It all goes in, and his paintings level out those references. So he doesn't differentiate between sort of high art and low art, high culture and low culture.
And so too, across time, you know, the present is conflated with the past. But I think, you know, a picture like this shows you how his mind is working. He's this extraordinary sponge. You know, it was reported by an old girlfriend that he would just sort of scan these books and have this facility for absorbing and remembering details which he can then articulate in the paintings. So ultimately, you know, the question arises, you know, how do we make sense of this work? Well, it's both made of fragments, but it's also a composite, a synthesis of all of these ideas. And I think fundamentally, it tells us how he is being alert and responsive to the world around him, and he's constantly learning and thinking and analyzing. We're now looking at Ishtar, painted in 1983, and Ishtar refers to the Egyptian goddess of fertility and war. And what you'll find is how he uses words as substitutes for sort of pictorial representations. And language is so important in Basquiat's paintings. It's full of these linguistic references and quotations, as well as these graphic renditions of detailing that you might well find in the street or in archaeological ruins, this layering over time that he evokes in these pictures. Interesting painting in that it's a triptych. It plays into this idea of a religious work, I guess. And there were lots of religious references on there. You talked about Ishtar, the Egyptian goddess. There were references to the jawbone. There were references to passages from the Old Testament. So Basquiat, as you say, is very well read. He lays in all those references. There are lots of pieces of film of him working with the TV on and books open. We know he was in love with new Xerox machines where, as you say, he could copy all of these images, refer to them, paste them in. So there is this kind of hunger to push information into the images. But they're not logical. Why should they be logical? This is post-punk New York. They're not logical. You are asked to dip in and connect to the things that you understand. Well, he's sifting and collecting and editing. He's revising his decisions. We've got sort of really obscure references. Motor area, does that refer to a car? Well, I'm thinking actually of neurology from his textbooks. We're looking here at kind of little strange details of cartoon characters, and we've got a hand there, like with these sort of thunderbolts coming out in the central panel. The eye is really pulled in different directions. There's this sort of enticing quality to these paintings. And we could spend an hour looking at this picture. It is so rich in detail and suggestion and possibility, really. And just finally, I like the idea that the panels don't connect visually, which is what you expect. You expect a seamless way of moving your eye from one to the other, and he doesn't give you that, which is a brave thing to do. So Jean-Michel Basquiat is this extraordinary, prodigious talent with this very short life. But I think what we learn is really that these pictures still live. You know, there's this energy, this dynamism, this curiosity about life, about history, but also the present. And I think he really anticipates the age of multimedia. You know, you can see Facebook, YouTube, Twitter in his work. He's constantly sampling and riffing and rapping really on all of these different ideas and influences that he's seeing and also learning about through books and other materials.
I think you're right. It's almost a precursor to our social media world, isn't it? And if he was here now, he would definitely be part of that or critiquing that. Equally, he's referring to all those people that have come before him. Leonardo, Gray's Anatomy, Rembrandt, Warhol, all of those things are pushed into the paintings. And he is exquisitely good at referencing through text, through drawing, through music, actually, all of those different things that are happening. And he really is a product of 1970s, 1980s New York. I don't think he could have occurred anywhere else. You have pop art, you have New York going into this sort of economic decline in the 1970s, you have punk and a new music scene and rap in the 80s, and he manages to plunder all of those things to give us new commentary.
Collaboration is really important to him, musically, artistically, meeting new sort of influencers, mentors like Andy Warhol. But I think ultimately we come back to this singular kind of vision he has. And I find the paintings very expressive. I think there's a lot of thought, but also we shouldn't set aside how expressive and emotional these pictures are. And in that way, he's a great kind of romantic artist.
He always said that he wanted people to connect, for them to be immediate, for them to be accessible, and they definitely are. You're right, they do still live.